Since its inception in 2009, fans of Bioware's gritty, blood-spattered fantasy series have been swept away on multiple epic adventures, whether fighting off the devastating effects of the Fifth Blight, becoming the champion of Kirkwall, or attempting to close a metaphysical boundary between the physical world and the spirit realm. Dragon Age enthusiasts have found themselves embroiled in countless action-packed, emotionally charged quests upon which the very fate of the world hangs. However, like a big box of Maltesers, adventuring through mysterious lands filled with magic and danger is something that's best shared with friends, and luckily the Dragon Age series takes care of that, providing a veritable Skyhold Fortress-full of stalwart and capable companions to venture out into the world of Thedas with, as well as engaging in downtime, rivalries, and even a spot of romance if you're lucky. Oh, and just to be clear, the Maltesers thing was a simile. I will not be sharing my Maltesers.
With the advent of Dragon Age the Veilguard currently looming over us like a demon-spewing Fade portal, we're starting to feel the telltale signs of our old lyrium addiction resurfacing. And to celebrate that strange, tingly sensation, we're going to rank every companion character in the Dragon Age series so far from worst to best. We'll be basing this ranking on a great deal of important factors, including but not limited to the companions' overall likability, their importance to the plot and place in the greater series lore, and how useful they are in a scrap. We should also stress that if a character appears in the lower echelons of our list, it doesn't necessarily mean that we think they are poorly written or designed. Indeed, it takes just as much talent to create a disagreeable malcontent as it does a likeable character, but that doesn't mean we want to take them Draco-Lisk riding across the Western approach.
We'll be including all of the companion characters from each of the 3 main games in the series, as well as the DLC companions that were released alongside or following their parent titles. However, we will not be including the various temporary companions in Dragon Age Origins, as many of them are only encountered briefly in the Origins sections and the rest are barely in your party long enough to make an impression. So I'd like to take this time to offer a quick apology to fans of Daveth and Ser Jory, and may they rest in peace.
Right, enough of this drawn-out origin story. Let's get straight to the joining ritual that is arranging all of these lovely Dragon Age companions according to our own personal preferences. You drink the Darkspawn blood first, though, okay? I promise I'll take a sip afterwards.
Let's rank 'em. I'm Grey Warden Ben.
And I'm Inquisitor Peter, and this is every Dragon Age companion, ranked from worst to best.
The Unrankables. These are the companions that aren't considered temporary, but don't really have personalities to speak of beyond a basic identity. To be specific, we're talking about the various types of Darkspawn thralls that are recruitable in the Darkspawn Chronicles DLC for Origins, and the Runic Golem from the Golem's Amgarak DLC, also for Origins. Whilst it's certainly cool to play as the bad guys in the Darkspawn Chronicles, the thralls are, appropriately, more underlings to throw at the enemy, just like a vile Hurlock vanguard in command of a horde of pure evil would, and the Golem is simply a modified version of the regular golems that are encountered throughout the Dwarven lands. The big guy is certainly useful to have around, but doesn't have much of a personality, unlike another golem we know. More on that later though. We'll also quickly mention Legion of the Dead warrior Ren and Battle Scholar Volta from Dragon Age Inquisition's The Descent DLC. Both of these guys are interesting in their own ways, with Ren getting an heroic demise and Volta meeting a rather mysterious fate, but the player never actually has direct control over either of these characters, making them more guest stars than companions, and we can't be muddying up the ranking with that kind of thing. Right, now then companions, let's rank some companions. Good. Number 40. Sebastian Vale, Dragon Age 2, The Exiled Prince DLC. Do you remember when we said in the intro that just because a companion is a bit lower down on the list that it doesn't mean they're necessarily bad? Well, that doesn't apply here, because Sebastian Vale is somewhat infamous among the Dragon Age faithful for being all kinds of bland. A member of the royal family of Starkhaven and a skilled archer to boot, in his youth Sebastian spent much of his time, money and effort on drinking heartily and wooing the local ladies. Fed up with his behaviour, his family shipped him off to Kirkwall to join the Chantry and endure the vow of chastity this entails, so that he wouldn't be able to sire any rogue princelings who might become a royal problem later on. After escaping from the Chantry, Sebastian found faith in his own way and eventually returned voluntarily. His meeting with Dragon Age 2 protagonist Hawke comes about after his family are murdered and he's searching for someone to help him look into the unpleasant matter. A neat little backstory then, but this didn't help Sebastian even begin to find his way into the hearts of most Dragon Age fans. As a Day 1 DLC character, it never felt like he fully integrated into the cast, and his personality comes off as flat and boring. The DLC that he comes with is fairly limited and forgettable, further souring the situation, and it's almost become a bit of a meme for franchise fans to spout vitriol about him when discussing their favourite and least favourite companions. When you also consider that, as a ranged rogue, he's fighting with Varric for a place in the party, this poor fellow never stood a chance. Number 39. Orson Haver, Dragon Age Origins A Tale of Orzammar DLC. If I were to approach you in a Tesco or some other run-of-the-mill establishment and say, "Hey, you remember that dwarf warrior companion from Dragon Age with a drinking problem?" After having backed away slowly while surreptitiously checking for your phone, keys and wallet, you'd probably think I was talking about orange-haired axe enthusiast Oghren. "Well, actually," I'd say as I was chasing you into the car park, "I was referring to Orson Haver, the other dwarf warrior companion with a drinking problem from A Tale of Orzammar DLC." Mr. Haver doesn't really have all that much going on, to be honest. Players meet him in the Tapster's Tavern during the A Tales of Orzammar DLC. He's got a big head and a brown beard, and he's quite drunk and somewhat confused as to his current situation. Many of those character traits might be quite relatable to some, but none of it is exactly deep or memorable. Add to this the fact that the A Tale of Orzammar DLC is very short and isn't voice acted, and poor Orson Haver doesn't really get much opportunity to shine. At the very least though, his thirst for adventure is as strong as his thirst for booze, as he's very quick to be persuaded to join the player-created protagonist on an escapade with very little understanding as to the why, so that's definitely something to be respected, right? The fact is though, if you ask most Dragon Age fans who Orson Haver is, you're likely to be met with the kind of resounding "Who?" that would echo thunderously around the deep roads, Pippin knocking a skeleton down a well style. You'll just have to hope it doesn't summon an army of Darkspawn. Number 38. Valana, Dragon Age Origins Awakening DLC. Now, while most Dragon Age players are annoyed by Sebastian and very few give Orson a second thought, the next companion on our list is at least interesting enough to stir up a fire in people's bellies, to the point that some players of the Dragon Age Origins Awakening DLC have declared that they'd rather not have Valana in the party at all. This Dalish elf's background is that of a quiet and awkward child being socially rejected by her peers and finding solace in the obsessive study of elven history. When her magic manifested at a young age, things were finally starting to come up Valana, that is, until some humans decided to try and burn her clan out of the woods. Ever since then, Valana's life has been a spiral of vengeance, and many observers are of the opinion that she's her own worst enemy for taking things way too far. Valana is first encountered in the Wending Wood, where she has been using the act of murder to terrorize nearby villages as vengeance for the death of the group of elves with whom she'd banded together to retaliate to the whole wood-burning thing. As fate would have it, it turns out her elves were actually slaughtered by Darkspawn, and if the player chooses to try to explain this to Valana, it's possible to direct her revenge-obsessed wrath in another direction and recruit her into the party. The thing is, Valana is disproportionate retribution personified, and while there's something to be said for a completely mad and murderous elven witch from the woods backing you up, many players have admitted to killing her for the severity of her crimes rather than having to listen to her self-righteous bleating for the rest of the game. Number 37. Talis, Dragon Age 2 Mark of the Assassin DLC. Next on our list is a character that originated in the live-action web series Dragon Age Redemption. Played by geekdom celebrity Felicia Day in both the web series and the Dragon Age 2 DLC Mark of the Assassin, this slave-turned-trained killer is a Qunari. Wait, that can't be right. Don't those guys have horns most of the time? Oh, hold on, she's an elf who became a Qunari. That makes more sense. Her name is Talis, which, like Qunari, is more of a title than anything, as Talis means those who solve, and being an assassin, she generally solves things through murderous means. Not that she doesn't have her reasons for getting a bit stabby from time to time, considering her parents sold her into slavery to pay off a debt, and she only escaped thanks to the ship she was on being captured by the Qunari. Why so low down the list then? Well, by most accounts, the Dragon Age community weren't as starstruck by Felicia Day as Bioware were. Talis is essentially a fan character inserted into the game and lore, and some concessions were made, especially when it came to the Qunari culture, in order to shoehorn her in. Many players were happy to just enjoy her dramatic yet cutesy quirkiness, but to those who aren't won over by that sort of thing, she's poorly written, doesn't really fit into the world, and comes across as a bit of a Mary Sue, a self-insert character who is great at everything, has only positive flaws, is quickly accepted, adopted by all of the established characters and exhibits cliched traits and a lack of depth. To sum up, it seems that most Dragon Age fans would echo Mr. Ice Cube when it comes to taking Talis into their party.
Bye, Felicia.
Number 36. Sarah, Dragon Age Inquisition. Speaking of kooky quirkiness, our next character is kooky quirkiness personified. Red Jenny herself, Sarah. On the surface of it, Sarah seems like a surefire fan favourite, being a mentally unhinged rogue who likes to stick it to the noble classes, kind of like Robin Hood if he enjoyed playing elaborate pranks instead of redistributing riches. Oh, and if he was also pants-on-head crazy. In reality though, Sarah's kookiness ultimately failed to win over the masses, and the reveal of some unpleasant personality traits that show a lack of self-awareness are what led to this particular elven archer being the lowest rated non-DLC companion on our list, and the lowest ranked companion from Dragon Age Inquisition. Though Sarah is an elf, she sees herself as more of a human thanks to her background, and fell in with the outlaw group known as the Friends of Red Jenny early on in life. She's always had an issue with pompous nobles that care little for the peasantry, and became a self-taught pro with the bow in order to enact her revenge on said nobles and stand up for the little people. All very wholesome so far, right? Well, sometimes she takes things a little too far, and thanks to living absolutely out there in Cloud Cuckoo Land, is completely impossible to reason with. Many see her as immature, brash, and way more interested in harming nobles than helping those oppressed by them. This is one of those examples of a character that's definitely well written, but not all that likable once you scratch the surface. She also has the same problem Sebastian had in Dragon Age 2. She's a rogue character in a game in which the ever-popular Varric exists. No amount of swearing, raspberry blowing, and name-calling is going to overcome that. Number 35. Vivienne, Dragon Age Inquisition. Vivienne couldn't be more different from Sarah, being on the polar opposite end of the Dragon Age Inquisition companion scale when it comes to upbringing, politics, and general outlook, but the two diametrically opposed women do have something in common. They're both deep, well-written characters that just rubbed people up the wrong way. Vivienne is in the unique position of being a circle mage while also enjoying political power, and she comes across as a bit of a snob who enjoys talking down to people, including the Inquisitor, despite being pleasant during their initial meeting. Vivienne showed great potential as a mage and a scholar from a young age, and was always adept at catching the eye of people in power, eventually becoming court enchanter to the Empress Selene and managing to hold great political sway despite the fact that mages are prohibited from holding such positions. All of this means that Vivienne, as charming as she can sometimes be, cannot help but view the world from her gilded cage, and has a habit of being condescending to many of the more likable companions. She's handy in a fight and often exhibits a sparkling wit, but Vivienne is only in it for herself and excels at the kind of cutthroat political maneuvering that most people find distasteful. She's more than happy to live it up in her luxurious mansion while the rest of the mages are little more than prisoners, and she absolutely steadfastly refuses to feel bad about it. We're putting her ahead of Sarah only for the fact that even if you don't like her, you'll still kind of have to respect her. Number 34. Loghain, Dragon Age Origins. Everything about Loghain points to him being a top-tier Dragon Age companion. He's portrayed as the main non-Darkspawn antagonist throughout Dragon Age Origins, has sympathetic reasons for his actions should the player dig a bit deeper, and the writing does a good job of not forecasting that he's a potential recruitable companion, meaning that his eventual redemption can come as quite the surprise. Loghain had the chance to become the Magus of the Western RPG, so what went wrong? As a leader of Ferelden's armies at the coming of the Blight, and a man who bears a deep distrust of the Grey Wardens, Loghain and the protagonist of Dragon Age Origins were destined to clash. After a devastating betrayal at the Battle of Ostagar, Loghain wades headfirst into full-blown villain territory, but once he is defeated at a subsequent Landsmeet, it is possible to recruit Loghain and have him become the very thing he mistrusted most: a Grey Warden. If this path is chosen, the player will have the opportunity to consider some of the events of the game from Loghain's point of view, and may come to realize that many of his actions were more than a little justified. The former commander will also willingly sacrifice himself against the Blight if he gets the chance, proving that he's not such a bad guy after all. Unfortunately, he joins so late on that his new, more agreeable personality doesn't get a chance to shine, nor does he get an opportunity to live up to the more established characters in battle, leaving Loghain's companion status feeling a bit disappointing. Add in the fact that Alistair will definitely leave if Loghain joins the crew, and it's no surprise that most players prefer that he go off and do Grey Warden stuff on his own. Number 33. Sketch, Dragon Age Origins Leliana's Song DLC. There was a lot of DLC for Dragon Age Origins, and a lot of additional companion characters came along for the ride in this collection of side stories and alternate viewpoints. For the most part, this meant many of the part-time party members didn't get as much of a chance to make an impression as their full-game counterparts, but on the other hand, they didn't get as much of a chance to get on our nerves either. As such, many of these DLC-bound battle brethren are consigned to the mid to low tier of the Dragon Age companion ranking. An example of this phenomena is the cautious healer known as Sketch, who appeared in the Leliana's Song DLC as a companion to Leliana. Leliana's Song is a prequel story to Dragon Age Origins and tells the tale of a pivotal point in the Orlesian Bard's past before she came to be involved in the events of the main game. Sketch is a mage who met Leliana in Val Royeaux and displays a somewhat scatterbrained personality and a desire to avoid conflict if at all possible. He isn't really much for adventure, but after proving to be a capable mage and developing a reputation for getting things done with his unexpected approach to solving problems, he finds himself tagging along with Leliana's bunch. That is about it for Sketch. Probably the best thing about him is his vitriolic party banter with fellow Leliana's Song companion Tug and his role as the straight man in that relationship. Also, the fact that he stays loyal to the end despite constantly wanting to go home gives him a couple of bonus points. There's just not that much to him though. You could barely even call him a fully fledged character. It's almost as if he's unfinished, like a sketch. Number 32. Silas Corthwaite, Dragon Age Origins Leliana's Song DLC. Like many of the most interesting companions, not just in Dragon Age but in life in general, Silas Corthwaite is first encountered in a prison. At around the midpoint of the Leliana's Song DLC, the titular vocalist finds himself in a spot of bother with a sadistic ruffian named Harwin. Waking up in a deep, dark dungeon a bit later and being aided by a mysterious voice with a really powerful torch, Leliana soon finds her old pal Sketch and also makes a new friend in the shape of this former rebel soldier turned hunter. Silas found himself in the clink thanks to being caught in the act of hunting illegally on the grounds of the Arl of Denerim. He was nabbed by the aforementioned Harwin and left to stew in the Arl's dungeons where he had been for months before Leliana and Sketch came along. All in all, Silas is a kind of okay guy. His crime was relatively minor, and he heartily agrees to follow Leliana to repay his debt to her, proving a staunch companion from that point on. The player can also give him the opportunity to get revenge on Harwin for keeping him locked up for months, which he'll happily take advantage of with the faithful old punch in the face and push off a cliff combo. Classic. The thing about Silas, though, is that he's a replacement character, a suspiciously similar substitute, and unless the party member a replacement character is replacing is particularly disliked, then they're usually fighting an uphill battle with the fandom. That's why he's lower down on our list than the person he replaced, the replacee, if you will. See? We don't just throw these things together randomly. Number 31. Tug, Dragon Age Origins Leliana's Song DLC. Unrelated to 90s WWF wrestler Tugboat, although there's definitely a bit of a resemblance, Tug is the third of the companions from the Leliana's Song DLC, and if you hadn't already guessed by the content of the previous entry, he doesn't fare too well when all's said and done. Brash and straightforward, Tug is a surfacer dwarf who makes for a perfect henchman owing to the fact that he gets the job done and doesn't ask questions. He's also a bit of a mysterious fellow, revealing very little about his past and proving to be quite untraceable even to someone with Leliana's abilities. Still, after repeatedly proving himself as loyal and useful to have around, Leliana is happy to let him have his secrets. The second most memorable thing about him is his banter with the skittish mage Sketch and their friendship that seems antagonistic on the surface but is actually rather heartwarming. The most memorable thing about him, though, is that he meets a horrible end. That's right, no matter the choices made throughout the DLC, Tug is doomed to not survive the party's little dungeon interlude. Upon discussing matters with Sketch, it's discovered that Tug was killed thanks to a concentrated effort to be as obnoxious as possible to the prison guards in order to distract them from attempting to cut off Sketch's hands so that he couldn't cast magic. Oh well, at least he got to enjoy being an insufferable arse during his final hours. It's this honourable sacrifice that gives Tug the nod over his Leliana's Song stablemates, and his gruff demeanour and shady background somehow makes it all the more wholesome that he made the ultimate sacrifice to look out for a friend. Really tugs at the heartstrings, doesn't it? Sorry. Number 30. Anders, Dragon Age Origins Awakening DLC and Dragon Age 2. Anders is an interesting fellow, that's for sure. A divisive figure in his first appearance in the Dragon Age Origins Awakening DLC, he becomes far less popular in Dragon Age 2 owing to the fact that he's, well, undergone some changes, shall we say. No one knows Anders' real name, as he never revealed it when taken to the Circle Tower after an accidental barn burning revealed his status as a mage. His Circle nickname, given because his family originally came from the Anderfells, was the one that stuck, and Anders' tragic backstory was complete. In his Awakenings guise, Anders could be described as one of the more popular characters. Despite some hypocritical tendencies, many chose him as their romance option and enjoyed his dialogue, as he especially won people over with his affinity for Cat and his hilarious doting over Sir Pouncelot, his adopted feline. In Dragon Age 2, Anders has willingly merged with the spirit Justice, giving him a certain spookiness, an unwillingness to engage in any kind of intimacy, and a tendency to lose control. On top of this, his pushiness and agenda-led personality traits come to the fore, souring many people on Anders even before he engaged in an act of terrorism. While Anders has definitely taken part in some questionable antics in his time, the activity that really got a lot of people shaking their heads and fists was that whole blowing up the Chantry in Kirkwall thing, an accident in which hundreds of innocent lives were lost and many more were indirectly affected. That's a moral horizon you just don't come back from. Remember that barn burning thing that revealed his mage abilities in the first place? Amazing how things tend to come full circle, isn't it? Heh, circle. That's a good one. Number 29. Justice. Dragon Age Origins Awakening DLC. Alright, we've talked about Anders, and now it's time to talk about Anders' passenger. The entity, known as Justice, is first introduced in the Dragon Age Origins Awakening DLC, and at first glance looks like a chap with a very unsettling skin condition. This is true, in a way, because Justice is a Fade spirit inhabiting the dead body of a Grey Warden named Christoph, and the skin condition is decomposition. Spirits of the Fade tend to be manifestations of some form of notion or emotion found in humans, and while the various Dragon Age protagonists and companions will spend the vast majority of their time in Thedas interacting with the demonic beings that embody more negative traits, positive ones exist too. Justice is, unsurprisingly, all about the concept of justice, and though it finds itself in the material world accidentally, it chooses to hang around and can be convinced to join the player should the right conditions be met. He's certainly a unique character, although he does share similarities with justice-obsessed spirit-inhabited suit of armor Valor from Bioware adjacent RPG Planescape Torment, and gives the player party in Awakening a welcome supernatural twist, but he never resonated with the Dragon Age community as much as might be expected. Justice is usually found in the mid-tier of people's Dragon Age Origins character rankings, but this standing tends to drop when his involvement in Dragon Age 2 comes into the mix. Though Anders allowed himself to be possessed by Justice, the communion changed both of them for the worse. Anders became a whole lot more emo, as detailed earlier, and Justice becomes tainted by Anders' somewhat twisted views. What we're left with is a spooky-eyed monster who explodes a church, and there's no justice in that, is there? Number 28. Finn. Dragon Age Origins Witch Hunt DLC. You'll have to bear with me on this one, as being a character from a smaller Dragon Age Origins DLC, details on this particular companion are a bit Finn on the ground. Right, now that I've got that out of my system, let's talk about Finn. Introduced in the Dragon Age Origins Witch Hunt DLC, Finn is a circle mage with a thirst for knowledge and an obsession with books and learning. He moves the plot of Witch Hunt along nicely with his knowledge of the Alluvian, a magical elven mirror that the Grey Warden is looking for, and manages to have a somewhat memorable personality despite having DLC-level screen time. Finn's thing is that he's an extreme neat freak who has very little interest in leaving the Circle Tower and despises the mistreatment of books. Despite this, his knowledge, as well as his healing ability in a party that's comprised of the Warden, a warrior, and a dog, is integral to the completion of the quest, even though his sole motivation for joining the adventuring party is to find out more about the Alluvian. Finn enchants his robe to stay perfectly clean and abhors exercise of all kinds because it messes up his appearance. That proves just how much he wants to find the mirror. Finn entertains with his neurotic outbursts and lack of enthusiasm for being outside, and he's also not averse to using blood magic if it furthers his quest for knowledge. Kind of. It's a grey area when the blood is just a component to the spell, apparently. Another little quirk to Finn's personality is his overly long name. Florian Phineas Horatio Aldebrandt Esquire, to be exact. He keeps it to himself though, as historically people have tended to shorten it to Flora. He prefers Finn, but honestly, I think Flora is a lovely name. Number 27. Wynne. Dragon Age Origins. You've got to be finite to win it! And now it's time to discuss another magic user with a proclivity for healing, but this one has a much more prominent role and place in the Dragon Age zeitgeist, being probably the most useful party member in Dragon Age Origins, especially if the Warden is a combat class. A stray taken in by a farming family who became a standout student in the Circle of Magi, Wynne is a devout woman with a strong sense of duty and a respect for magic and the dangers it brings with it. She is tremendously respected in the Circle and readily volunteered to help when news of the call to arms against the Fifth Blight reached her. A strong and powerful ally then, so why isn't she higher up the list? While part of it may be that she doesn't have the sheer force of personality or striking looks of many of the other Origins party members, it may also be down to the fact that she will quickly turn on the Warden if their views don't align. Do try and keep her on side though, as she's very useful to have around thanks to her healer status. She's not without her hidden depths either, as players will learn that she had a son out of wedlock with a Templar no less back in her past. The son was taken away and she still thinks about him a lot. Tragic, really. I certainly hope he's doing okay and didn't end up being eaten by a darkspawn or something. Anyway, what I'd really like to see is her test her magical skills against our previous entrant. You know, just because I want to know which one would win out of Wynne and Finn. Try saying that a few times after a glass or two of Orlesian wine. Peter?
Number 26, Brogan Dace, Dragon Age Origins, The Golems of Amgarak DLC. We're heading underground now to Amgarak Thaig, no less, a lost dwarven settlement said to house advanced secrets of golem construction. In the Dragon Age Origins DLC, The Golems of Amgarak, the Warden Commander is sent to retrieve a party that went on an expedition to Amgarak to recover said golem research and never returned. Dwarven noble Brogan Dace was in that party. I suppose the fact he's on a list of playable companions kind of spoils the fact that the Warden finds him, but what you might not have expected is how changed poor Brogan is by his experiences in the depths of Amgarak, largely because the place is fade-touched and he's been exposed to pure lyrium. Yes, Brogan Dace is a shadow of his former self, but he's arguably used to shadows, having lived in the shadow of his brother Jerrik for his entire life. Despite proving himself again and again as a staunch and loyal warrior, Brogan has never received the glory of his more outgoing sibling, but has never complained of such, happy to live in the background while his brother takes all the plaudits. Again, being a DLC companion, Brogan doesn't get the stage to win players over like his main game counterparts, but possesses some likable qualities, and his visual design and voice acting adequately portray the image of a shell-shocked veteran who's seen some terrible things. As the adventure continues, he does come to his senses a bit and convinces his brother to leave the dangerous technologies to perish as Amgarak starts to fall around them, showing that he has got a sensible brain somewhere behind all that vacant rambling. It's a good thing, too. Even the shiniest of golems isn't worth getting crushed under countless tons of falling rock for. Number 25, Jerrik Dace, Dragon Age Origins, The Golems of Amgarak DLC. Now, if you're not familiar with the Golems of Amgarak DLC, you might expect that Jerrik would be a bit of an antagonistic figure, with Brogan forever living in the shadow of his more glory-hunting brother. But they actually have a bit of a Boromir-Faramir thing going on, with Jerrik showing a heartwarming amount of fondness for his introverted sibling. It's Jerrik that hires the Warden to help him find Brogan, despite their father already having held a funeral for him, and Jerrik insists on tagging along too. This familial dedication is not Jerrik's only positive trait, as he's known in Orzammar as a brave warrior who's survived numerous battles and darkspawn encounters, and has managed to emerge victorious on every occasion. He's also close friends with a Bronto named Snug, who he encountered and nursed back to health early on in his military career. How lovely. Weird name though, he doesn't look all that snug. Anyway, the point is, Jerrik is a strong and respectful ally throughout the Golems of Amgarak DLC, and his stubborn insistence on not giving up on his brother is an endearing trait. He also sees sense in his brother's words when Amgarak is collapsing at the end, despite wanting to claim the riches challenges that the golem research held within could offer. He gets a little more time to shine than his brother, as he accompanies the protagonist from the beginning of the adventure, but he still suffers from the usual DLC character thing of not being as fleshed out as most of the other companions. We're giving him a chin up over his sibling though, because he's just such a good guy, and without him, Brogan would probably be an unknown skeleton in some long-lost subterranean hallway by now. Nothing like a bit of brotherly love, eh? Number 24, Ariane, Dragon Age Origins Witch Hunt DLC. Ariane is the aforementioned warrior party member from the Witch Hunt DLC of Dragon Age Origins, and is a gifted elvish hunter who was sent on a quest to retrieve a treasured item believed stolen from her clan by the witch Morrigan. Her search for said artifact takes her to Flemeth's hut, where she meets the Warden Commander and joins the quest to seek Morrigan and the Alluvian. While not one of the most memorable Dragon Age companions, Ariane does have a certain appeal, not least for being a fun-sized elf with a prickly attitude who happily wades into battle dual-wielding full-size swords. She also turns out to be integral to the quest, as when a magical ritual is used that specifically requires Dalish blood to work, she is immediately willing to cooperate, and that definitely shows some dedication. What really makes Ariane interesting though is her unique relationship with a certain other party member. Now, if you've been paying attention, you'll be aware that the adventuring party in the Witch Hunt DLC is composed of the Warden Commander, the mage known as Finn, Ariane herself, and Dog. And Ariane can apparently understand everything Dog has to say. Though their relationship is initially quite antagonistic, Ariane and Dog eventually form a bond of mutual respect, and in one particular piece of party banter that happens in the Circle Tower, Ariane complains about being repeatedly lectured by Dog. It's this rare relationship with the resident hound that allows Ariane to stand tall over most of the other characters from the smaller Origins DLCs. She's not quite as good as Dog though, because Dog has one particular advantage that she can never hope to overcome, that being that he is a dog. In fact, number 23, Dog, Dragon Age Origins. Yes, we've kind of already spoiled the reveal in the previous entry, but just so that everyone is perfectly clear, the companion known as Dog from Dragon Age Origins is in fact an actual dog. A Mabari warhound, to be precise, which goes some way to explaining why he's kind of scary looking, somewhere in between a Staffordshire Bull Terrier and a gargoyle. Despite his intimidating appearance and the fact he will happily and efficiently rend flesh from bone in a battlefield situation, Dog is actually a big softie and a sweetheart, as evidenced by any number of his interactions with other companions. Dog proves to be a stalwart battle companion. Despite not using weapons like the rest of the party, he can be equipped with various collars and war paint designs that bolster his offensive and defensive capabilities and give him a fetching new look. There's nothing quite like personalizing your pets after all. Dog can also occasionally dig up useful items for the Warden, and is unflinchingly loyal to the end. The perfect companion then? Well, unfortunately, no. We are only at number 23 in the list after all. We hate to say it, but there are a few issues that come with Dog on account of him being a dog. The lack of equipment and versatility just puts him behind the likes of Alistair, Sten, and Oghren when it comes to useful warrior party members, especially with regards to damage output, and this means that this particular chunky boy just doesn't cut it in combat. You can absolutely take Dog with you on your adventures, and he can be a useful tank-type character, but deep down, you will know that you're hamstringing yourself by not having a more useful companion in that slot. Just stay back and guard the camp, Dog, okay? Good boy. Number 22, Oghren, Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age Origins Awakening DLC. From Dog to Og now, or Oghren as he's known by literally everyone. No one calls him Og. This particular feisty redhead is one of the potential party members in Dragon Age Origins, and is the group's sole dwarf representative, as far as companion options go. His backstory is one of alcoholism and familial shame, which means that while Oghren can come across as the stereotypical drunken, gruff warrior type we see so often in fantasy video games, the little guy is far deeper than he is tall. You see, before meeting the Warden, Oghren was one of the participants in a marriage of convenience, where he became the betrothed to a woman named Branka, a member of a wealthy Smith caste family. Though initially content, the couple soon came to find difficulties in their relationship, and Oghren, outshone by his paragon of a spouse, turned to drink. Eventually shunned by his own family as well as hers, Oghren was left behind when she took the lot of them on an expedition into the deep roads and never returned. Now he lives in shame and isn't even allowed to bear weapons in Orzammar, so jumps at the chance of going off on a quest with a meagre chance of survival. Oghren is an entertaining character, most notable for his uncouth antics, his drunken flirtatiousness, and his tragic family life. And this extends to the Awakening DLC, where he becomes a Grey Warden and joins the party once more, though many find his Awakening incarnation a little less interesting than his Origins one. A well-written and fairly well-liked character who sits somewhere in the middle when it comes to Dragon Age companion rankings, Oghren isn't going to win any Best Companion trophies, but for once in his life, he's not going to shame himself either, and I will drink to that. Number 21. Zevran, Dragon Age Origins. Our next companion is also known for his attempts at flirtation, although Zevran approaches the subject somewhat differently to the drunken dwarf. Still, the intention is the same, right? Zevran is an elven assassin who had a troubled upbringing in the city of Antiva, being raised in a brothel after his woodcutter father was offed by the Antivan crows. As fate would have it, Zevran himself became a crow, and a very accomplished one at that, but lost his taste for it when he was forced to perform a hit on a dear friend and lover. The Grey Warden and Zevran first meet as enemies, with Zevran gathering a band of assassins and setting up a trap for the Warden on a roadside. Should the player defeat Zevran and his ne'er-do-wells in combat, and then decide to spare the crow's life, Zevran offers himself to the cause and becomes an eager and easygoing, if somewhat untrustworthy, companion. Intense questioning will reveal further depths to this unrepentant killer and outrageous flirt, including the fact that Zevran only took on the job of killing the remaining Grey Wardens in Ferelden as it seemed like a suicide mission, and after helping the Warden to destroy the Blight, Zevran will end up opposed to the Crows, focusing his off-screen efforts through the rest of the series on trying to destroy them from the inside. Despite all of these layers, however, Zevran is most well known for his promiscuousness, and for the fact that he's a bit useless in a fight. His ranking takes a big hit on the battlefield, and as a rogue from Dragon Age Origins, he's up against Liliana for a spot in the party, with the Orlesian Bard being far more competent when the battle theme starts playing. Sorry, Zevran, that famous charm alone won't get you to the top of this list. Number 20. Aveline Vallen, Dragon Age 2. As the first companion encountered by the protagonist in Dragon Age 2, aside from those with a familial bond, but more on them later, Aveline is also the first example of the Dragon Age series' tendency to present the player with a reliable, robust warrior type to keep them company early in their adventure, and even though she's the lowest ranked of that particular archetype on our list, she is still rather cool. Aveline is initially seen looking after her husband, Wesley, and this act handily illustrates her deeper characteristics. Ostensibly a chivalric knightly type, Aveline's beliefs differentiate her from that noble rank, as she will follow the chivalric code to a point, but will abandon it when it leads to reckless, nonsensical acts like fighting for lost causes or protecting fools from themselves. To illustrate this, it's revealed that she was part of the Ferelden army at the Battle of Ostagar, and ordered her detachment to retreat and go home whom once Loghain's betrayal turned the situation unwinnable. Soon after her initial encounter, a wild Flemeth appears and indicates that Wesley will soon be taken by the Taint. Either Hawke or Aveline administer the Mercy Kill, and another tragic Dragon Age companion is born. Once she's had a minute to get over this devastating loss, Aveline can fall for the guardsman known as Donick, and who wouldn't with those mutton chops, and her adorably awkward attempts at flirtation can be quite endearing, dropping such timeless pickup lines as "it's a real nice night for an evening," and failing so miserably at the dating game that Hawke has to step in to get things moving. Still, as useless as she is at charm, Aveline more than makes up for it on the battlefield. After all, who wouldn't want a woman who can wield a two-handed sword like that? Number 19. Cole, Dragon Age Inquisition. Unrelated to the likes of Cole McGrath, Cole Cassidy, and Augustus Cole — it's weird how many Coles there are in video games actually — Cole from Dragon Age Inquisition initially appears to be a spooky, big-hatted boy who pops up in strange situations while uttering weird, nonsensical prose. It's clear from the get-go that this fellow isn't a normal youngster, and not just because of his wild choice in headwear, but no amount of digging will reveal Cole's true identity for completely certain, as even he isn't sure what he is. Most likely a spirit of compassion bound to the physical world, some claim that Cole is a demon, and things get even more foggy as Cole's story unfolds and he can become more human and lose his spirit powers depending on the player's choices. Acting as a rogue in battle, Cole is a very interesting companion who spent his time before joining the Inquisitor seeking out people in terrible emotional pain and helping to ease their suffering. As well as being able to sense pain, Cole has the ability to make people forget he exists, which is handy for a sneaky character, and tries to help people in ways that can initially seem bizarre and confusing. His name comes from a poor apostate boy who was imprisoned and forgotten, and Cole, after failing to help him, took on his persona and appearance, basically embodying his regret. One for thoughtful players who want to contemplate the philosophies of suffering and forgiveness, Cole isn't for everyone, with some observers deterred by his off-putting appearance and roundabout way of speaking, but this so-called spirit of compassion is alright in our book, and he gets even more respect for having that level of bravery in his fashion sense. Gosh, just look at that hat. So bold. Number 18. Fenris, Dragon Age 2. From serene and selfless to bitter and resentful now, as our next companion, Fenris, has a bit of a chip on his shoulder, and it's a big one, like one of those big fat oven chips that never cooks all the way through. God, so annoying that. From the moment he steps out from behind the bloke he just killed, you know what you're getting with Fenris. A pretty, white-haired elf with memory loss and a merciless streak, who might have been the breakout star from a boy band in another life. Not that he doesn't have a good reason for all his irresistible brooding, mind you. He spent most of his life as a slave in Tevinter, and after escaping and fleeing to Kirkwall, he meets Dragon Age 2 protagonist Hawke during the Bait and Switch quest, where he uses the player's party to draw out and eliminate the mercenaries that are hunting him. Far from just being a pretty face with murderous intent, Fenris's hidden depths are revealed when his memories are restored and his mistrust of mages is tested when his sister is revealed to be magically inclined. He also has a pleasingly sarcastic wit, and even gets some tender moments, and is a popular romance option for male and female protagonists. Not everyone sees eye to eye with the vengeful elf though, as some players found his edginess too grating and his sharp tongue too discourteous, especially when directed at other, more beloved party members. However, if you are fond of handsome, mysterious, brooding fellows with tragic backstories, then you will love me. You will love Fenris. I don't know what came over me there. Also, all those swirls on his skin are lyrium-infused markings that give him the power to become incorporeal and pass through solid objects, and Fenris uses this to kill people by passing through them and solidifying inside them. Unpleasant, but cool, which sums him up, really. Number 17. Blackwall, Dragon Age Inquisition. If you played Dragon Age Inquisition but didn't pursue Blackwall's personal quests to their conclusion and basically let him hang out in Skyhold for the entire game, you may be of the opinion that this particular Grey Warden is a little on the bland side. You should have had more trust in Bioware though, as Blackwall is eventually revealed to have depths that belie his standard-looking, oldish guy in armor appearance. When Blackwall is first encountered, he's helping some local farmers fight back against bandits that have been taking advantage of the local unrest, and has been helping the people of the Crossroads with no expectation of reward. But what is this lone Grey Warden doing fighting demons in the hinterlands? What exactly is his deal anyway? Well, the answer to that is as fascinating as it is spoiler-riddled. While there was a Grey Warden named Blackwall, this bewhiskered man you see before you is not him. This is Tom Rainier, a former mercenary and former captain in the Orlesian army with a spotty past and a misguided view on morality. Tom Rainier sailed through life thanks to his charisma and skill in battle, but eventually found himself in some harrowing situations that sullied his name and saw his men forced to go into hiding or face execution. Rainier himself was eventually taken in by the real Blackwall, but when Blackwall sacrificed himself to save Rainier in the deep roads, Rainier took on Blackwall's identity and a sleeper hit of a Dragon Age companion was born. Once his dirty secret is exposed, the Inquisitor must decide Rainier's fate, giving Rainier/Blackwall a very interesting potential story path of misdeeds, heroics, and retribution, and making him one of the most complex characters in the series. Not bad for that random beardy bloke you met in the woods. Number 16. Cassandra Pentaghast, Dragon Age Inquisition. Competing with Blackwall for the role of best tank-type companion in Dragon Age Inquisition is Cassandra Pentaghast, and while Blackwall probably has the better tank potential technically, Cassandra usually wins out for most players thanks to her earlier introduction, as well as the fact that longtime franchise fans will remember her from Dragon Age 2, although she's apparently picked up a few scars between games. Still loves a good interrogation though. It's nice to see people sticking to their hobbies, isn't it? Seemingly antagonistic towards the player character at first, Cassandra soon becomes a loyal ally and a beacon of the Inquisition. She is one of the Seekers of Truth, a kind of secret police force working for the Orlesian Chantry, and she's fiercely loyal to the divine Justinia with a firm sense of justice. She's also distantly related to the Navaran royal family, but a series of traumatic events in her past caused her to leave behind her life of privilege and wealth and become a sword of the divine. Quite an intense and intimidating woman then, but Cassandra does have a sweeter side that's endeared her to many fans, with the occasional awkward moment, her vitriolic interactions with old foe Varric, and her ability to rethink how she feels about certain companions that she was initially opposed to, all proving important factors in winning over most Dragon Age fans. Though she's a bit too opinionated for some, Cassandra is a fan-favourite companion, important to the lore of 2 Dragon Age games. Like Aveline, she's the warrior that gets recruited early on to look after inexperienced players who might be trying a squishier class. And I don't know about you, but I'm very grateful to Cassandra for holding my hand on those snowy Frostback Mountain crags. Number 15. Isabella, Dragon Age 2. Another companion whose concept alone is enough to win her a few fans, Isabella is a saucy rogue who is as precise with a blade as she is with an insult. She's also a pirate, and in a game series without ninjas or robots, that automatically gets her some internet cool points. A recruitable companion in Dragon Age 2, Isabella's originally met in Dragon Age Origins, although she looks a bit different. As well as being an entertaining NPC, Isabella can teach the protagonist the duelist specialization, and is also open to a little private time, if you can really call it that when up to 4 people are potentially involved. She was a sleeper hit already, but by the time Dragon Age 2 came around, Isabella really had her unique look and personality nailed down, and that all-important shady backstory too. Isabella was born to a notorious thief and charlatan named Madame Harry, who would take her with her to help with cons and hustles. Isabella was never particularly cared for by her mother though, and was eventually sold into an arranged marriage. She didn't take to married life though, and so took to the seas instead once her husband had been assassinated by a certain Antivan crow whose name begins with Z. She commandeered her late husband's ship, the Siren's Call, and the rest is history. Isabella is mostly known in Dragon Age 2 for her scathing wit, promiscuousness, and entertaining rivalry with Aveline, but does have some misdemeanors to answer for, and can be very unreliable as far as party members go. However, despite potentially having as much blood on her hands as Anders, the fandom is far more willing to forgive her for it, because she never claims to be anything other than an underhanded rogue. Oh, and probably also because she's much prettier than him. You know what the internet's like. Number 14. Bethany Hawke, Dragon Age 2. In Dragon Age 2, players take on the role of Hawke, a customizable character who's the offspring of a noblewoman from Kirkwall and has twin younger siblings, Bethany and Carver. Depending on the player's choice of character class for Hawke, one of these unfortunate siblings is doomed to become the victim of a rather nasty and brutal ogre attack. Most people end up with Bethany in their party, as she's the one who survives if players choose the warrior or rogue class for Hawke, and these lucky souls will be treated to a rather pleasant companion. After surviving the early stages of the Dragon Age 2 campaign, Bethany will be in for a tumultuous time, and depending on the choices and allegiances of her protagonist's sibling, could end up as a circle mage, a grey warden, or even executed. Throughout these trying times, however, Bethany generally manages to maintain a positive and pleasant demeanour, although a colder side can be uncovered if enough Bethany-baiting decisions are made. Rare icy interactions aside, Bethany is remarkable for being the flat-out nicest companion option throughout the entire Dragon Age series, which makes her stand out amidst a cast of flawed idealists, misguided rogues, and outright dangers to themselves and others. She's undoubtedly a much more agreeable companion than her brother, should he be the one to survive the ogre attack, but that doesn't necessarily make her the better character. Complaints about Bethany include claims that she's a little bland, and exclamations that she has no real character arc, but despite not having the complex development her twin enjoys, her kind-heartedness and voice acting performance that makes her sound adorable even when she's mad make this magically inclined sibling a winner in our books. In our spellbooks. Number 13. Sten, Dragon Age Origins. As our first glimpse at the Canary race in the Dragon Age franchise, Sten is quite different from the hulking, horned giants we know them as today. Sten was born without horns, you see, and this was definitely something that occurred naturally and marks him as a person destined for greatness in Canary culture, and definitely not because graphical issues meant the development team had to get rid of them. Sten, whose name is actually a rank rather than a proper name, is a powerful warrior and a member of the Canary Vanguard known as the Beresad. He is extremely stoic and honourable to a fault, but is not without his weaknesses, as prior to meeting the Warden he loses his cool, due to losing his sword, and ends up slaying an innocent farming family. He's imprisoned when the player finds him, haunted by his actions and resigned to his fate, but can be convinced to seek his atonement by going down fighting the Blight instead. Should the player choose to free him and take him into the party, he will become the first Canary to have ever battled a Blight. See, I told you his lack of horns was a destined for greatness thing and nothing to do with graphical limitations whatsoever. Despite his countenance though, stern Sten is quite the entertaining travel companion should he be recruited, especially when Liliana pokes fun at his poorly hidden softer side, and he will eventually win over most of the other party members. Alistair ends up finding him quite reasonable, Morrigan finds him attractive, and even Dog sees him as a worthy ally. We think, anyway. I mean, let's face it, dogs see most people as worthy allies. It just goes to prove that one should never judge a Canary by his horns, or lack of horns, or by a game's graphical limitations, which had no bearing on the lack of horns, let's not forget. Number 12. Alistair, Dragon Age Origins. Alright, we're starting to see the big-time Dragon Age companions now, the ones that just pop straight into your head when you think about the series. Meet Alistair, the first proper companion from Dragon Age Origins, and a mainstay of the franchise from that point on. I mean, unless you sent him to his execution in your playthrough, that is, but I'm sure he still lives on in your heart, right? Most players tend to feel a kinship with Alistair from the beginning, given his affable personality and his role as a newly appointed Grey Warden tasked with guiding the player through the joining. But what is this supposed illegitimate son of King Marek doing in the Grey Wardens anyway? Well, good old Duncan recruited him, and Alistair, who was tired of being told what to do and was about to be forced into the Chantry, jumped at the chance. Depending on the choices made by the player throughout Origins, Alistair's fate can change drastically, but with the problem of a vacant throne in Ferelden and longtime companion Alistair being revealed to have royal blood, the ultimate solution seems obvious. Indeed, for most players, Alistair's most likely course of action is to leave the Grey Wardens and take the throne. You see, that's why you should keep him sweet, because it pays to have friends in high places. Like him or not, Alistair is a multi-layered and complex companion, and the fact that his detractors split evenly between arguing that he's a blandly heroic boar or a whiny, foolish man-child kind of illustrates this. Truth be told, he is all of these things and more. Wait, no, that makes him sound really bad. What I mean is, he's greater than the sum of his parts. Okay, was that clear? Did that make sense in the end? Ben?
Number 11. Sigrun, Dragon Age Origins Awakening DLC. Like the briefly mentioned Ren from the Dragon Age Inquisition DLC The Descent, Sigrun is part of the Legion of the Dead, but doesn't share the usual sour disposition that comes with that affiliation. In fact, she's quite chipper, if a little morbid at times. The Legion of the Dead is the arm of the Dwarven military with the most fierce reputation, owing to the fact that many of its members join to avoid punishment or dishonor, and that they all consider themselves to be already dead. Sigrun grew up poor and casteless, resorting to thievery at a young age. Despite attempting to escape her life of crime, she found herself drawn back in and wound up accidentally causing the death of an Orzammar guard while being chased down for pilfering a ruby-encrusted purse. At that point, she had to choose between the Legion or execution, and unsurprisingly, she signed up. When she meets the Warden Commander in the Awakening DLC, she is in something of an undignified situation, being dragged away by a throng of darkspawn to who knows what fate in the deep roads. Upon helping this unfortunate dwarf with striking facial tattoos, the player has the option to recruit her, and she'll join eagerly, seeing her chance to get revenge on the darkspawn that slaughtered her Legion of the Dead companions. The result of all this is a popular potential party member with lots of pros and very few cons. Sigrun is an interesting, strength-based rogue with an affinity for axes and a morbid sense of humour, and will likely be the most adorable death-seeking maniac you'll ever meet. Alas, most of her epilogues see her going off into the deep roads and finding that end that the Legion of Dead are destined to, so the chances of seeing this inked-up sweetheart again are slim.
We'll miss you, Sigrun.
Number 10. Meryl, Dragon Age 2. Wait, we're not finished with female Dragon Age companions with cute personalities and facial markings yet. It's Meryl's turn, and while this Dragon Age 2 party member isn't everyone's cup of tea, for those who like their companions a bit kooky and out there, Meryl is a fade-touched dream come true. Meryl actually originally shows up in the Dalish elf origin story in Dragon Age Origins, where she is a temporary companion for a Dalish elf protagonist. She will aid in the hopeless search for the elf Tamlin, and then Meryl and her clan will head off to the Free Marches in light of the blight threatening Ferelden. When she's encountered in Dragon Age 2, it immediately becomes apparent that she's developed a more unique appearance, a fantastical Welsh-adjacent accent, and a kind of endearing obliviousness that leads to all kinds of amusing encounters and situations. She joins the party in order to get away from her increasingly hostile clanmates and to learn more about reactivating an Alluvian, the aforementioned magical mirrors left behind by the ancient elves. Her fascination with the Alluvian doesn't win her many friends, and her insistence on keeping a fragment of said magical artifact earns her the distrust of her clan. For the sake of the survival of the Dalish, Meryl also sees no problem in resorting to blood magic, and this too puts her at odds with her clan as well as with potential party members like Anders and Fenris. As such, Meryl is an interesting and likeable character whose cute and quirky personality juxtaposes sharply with her pragmatism and willingness to take the dark path for the greater good. She's adorable, but you should definitely keep an eye on her, kind of like a tiger cub then, and not just because of the stripy face. Number 9. Shale, Dragon Age Origins The Stone Prisoner DLC. In the Stone Prisoner DLC for Dragon Age Origins, the player is able to find an odd-looking statue at the centre of the village of Honleith. Surprisingly enough, this sculpture is no mere decoration and is in fact a potential party member with a gravelly voice, a stony personality, and a rocky past. Shale is a war golem and a warrior-type character for the protagonist to employ against the Darkspawn, recruited by retrieving the golem's control rod from a merchant named Felix Grosbois. Shale immediately proved popular among Dragon Age fans, not least because it feels quite unique to have a hulking stone tank on legs stomping around after you. It's not just the intimidation factor that makes Shale stand out, it's her personality too. Oh yes, Shale is a she-golem, by the way, despite a rather male-sounding voice and somewhat statuesque physique. This is due to the fact that, during the First Blight, golems were created using a device called the Anvil of the Void, and the process of infusing a stone structure with life could not be completed without using the life force of another. Shale's donor, shall we say, was a female dwarf named Shale with a Y. See, even the funny DLC golem party member has that trademark shady past that every good Dragon Age companion needs. After fighting in the First Blight, Shale found her way into the employ of a mage and was eventually deactivated after the mage's mysterious demise. She served as Honleith's centerpiece of forgotten origin for many decades, but was aware the whole time. As such, for reasons I'm sure you can imagine, she's not a big fan of birds. This hatred of avians, along with Shale's dry wit and mercilessly sarcastic tone, combined to ensure that her legacy as a top-tier Dragon Age companion is forever set in stone. Number 8. Nathaniel Howe, Dragon Age Origins Awakening DLC. The next companion on our list doesn't exactly start off on good terms with the Warden Commander. In fact, their relationship kicks off in one of the worst ways possible, with this particular vengeful rogue imprisoned for some attempted thievery in the Grey Warden's base of operations. How does one of the deepest and most satisfying Dragon Age companionships develop from such a fraughtful inception then? Nathaniel Howe. That's how. Jesus. Nathaniel hails from the Dragon Age Origins Awakening DLC and is our highest rated DLC party member, with most players agreeing that he stands out as the most memorable companion from that particular adventure. His acts of thievery can be attributed to the fact that Vigil's Keep, where the Grey Wardens had made their base of operations, once belonged to the Howe family, and Nathaniel is convinced that his father was deposed and murdered by the Grey Wardens. If the player chooses to allow Nathaniel to live, he will eventually become a Grey Warden himself, and through a meeting with his sister will come to learn that the Grey Wardens were blameless in the matter of his father's death, and that Howe Sr. brought about his own demise by being an all-around despicable piece of work. Nathaniel will soon prove that the apple fell quite a long way from the tree, must have been windy that day, and through a satisfying bit of character development becomes one of the most reliable, supportive, and downright likeable Dragon Age companions to date. Nathaniel is open-minded, honest, very skilled in a fight, and exactly the sort of person you'd want to have your back as you face the many dangers of Thedas. It just goes to show, even if you get off on the wrong foot with someone, you can still become bestest buds forever in the end. Number 7. Iron Bull, Dragon Age Inquisition. Iron Bull, or the Iron Bull as he likes to be called, is the Canary companion option in Dragon Age Inquisition, and unlike Sten, this fellow definitely has horns. Iron Bull is first encountered on the Storm Coast and cuts an intimidating figure, but is friendly from the off and very honest about why and his mercenary group are offering their services up to the Inquisition. He works for the Ben Hasrath, you see, a faction of the Canary priesthood, and openly admits that he will be relaying information to said faction the entire time he is working for the Inquisitor. Most players will find themselves disarmed by this honesty, not to mention impressed by Bull's immensity, and will take him into the fold regardless, and things can and often will develop quite significantly from there. Depending on the player's choices, Iron Bull could end up defying the Ben Hasrath and becoming loyal only to the Inquisitor, and more prominently, he is a popular romance option for both male and female Inquisitors, and his shamelessness and honesty as a lover can be quite refreshing too, or so we're told. Even players who don't pursue Iron Bull romantically will appreciate him as a friend and ally though, and he's the perfect companion to share war stories with in front of a roaring fire while imbibing copious amounts of strong intoxicant. He would be higher up on our list if he was top tier in a fight, but unless you're a dab hand at setting up his skills, equipment and specializations, Iron Bull tends to get downed a lot. Oh, and there's also the fact that he might betray the player in the Trespasser DLC, but he'll only do that if you let his mercenary company die in the main game, so we can kind of understand it a bit. Right?
Number 6. Carver Hawke, Dragon Age 2. Time to talk about the other sibling from those mutually exclusive Hawke twins now. Carver is the one that survives should the player choose to play as a mage, and despite being nowhere near as agreeable a travelling companion as his sister, we'd argue that Carver wins out in the end with a character arc that had well and truly won us over by the time the credits rolled. Upon first impression, Carver can come across as a bit of a whiny malcontent, whose very presence in the party is a headache for Hawke. But even before any character development takes place, insightful players might be able to see through Carver's spiky surface, and some might even be able to relate to him, especially those who grew up as a younger sibling to a beloved older brother or sister. Carver's belly aching comes from a feeling of inadequacy, you see, and the hints of protectiveness that are shown despite his complaints are rather heartwarming, should you choose to take notice of them. Then there's the character development. Depending on Carver's fate, he can really change for the better, and in contrast to his sister, Bethany, will seem to find some form of inner peace should he end up joining with the Grey Wardens. The way Carver grows throughout the story of Dragon Age 2 arguably makes him more interesting than his late twin. The latter is certainly the more likeable character on the surface, but there's just so much more to Carver, and that's what makes him a favourite for fans who chose to give him a chance. So, if you're due another playthrough of Dragon Age 2, possibly one inspired by our humble video, make your Hawke into a mage and give Carver a go. He might just win you over. Eventually. Number 5. Dorian Pavus, Dragon Age Inquisition. The most famous fictional Dorian is probably Oscar Wilde's Dorian Gray, who embodies the folly of those in positions of wealth blindly following hedonistic pursuits. A first impression from Dorian from Dragon Age Inquisition might lead players to believe that he too embodies this notion, but Dorian is actually very aware of his position of privilege and attempts to use it to make the world a better place. You've got to admire his swagger though, and it's not surprising since his surname Pavus means peacock in Latin. He was born into a prestigious family and has always been a supremely talented mage in a society that values magical ability. He also clearly takes care of his appearance and is a dapper fellow with a quite exquisite moustache and a gleaming confidence to back it up. But there is heartache behind those dazzling eyes. Despite his talent, he grew up at odds with his family and proved to be a sour disappointment to them. He's also at odds with his home nation of Tevinter, what with their history of conquest and the whole slavery thing. Although he does see enough good in the place that he wants to change it for the better rather than completely renounce it. As a charismatic fellow and a legitimate force for good, it's little wonder that Dorian has stirred up quite the fan base. Add to this the fact that he's a delightful romance option for a male Inquisitor, or potentially an endearing one for Iron Bull should the Inquisitor's romantic eye rove elsewhere, and you have the recipe for an all-time favourite. Since a lot of Dragon Age the Veilguard seems to be set in Tevinter, there's a chance we might see him again too. Oh, that'll be nice, won't it? I hope nothing bad happens. Number 4. Varric Tethras, Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition. It's time for everyone's favourite beardless dwarf to take the stage now, as we'd like to introduce the member of House Tethras, wielder of a one-of-a-kind repeating crossbow named Bianca, and author of the thrilling detective noir novel Hard in Hightown, Varric. One of the characters that first springs to mind for many who've dabbled in the franchise, Varric is as popular as he is stout, and proves to be a reliable companion across Dragon Age 2 and Dragon Age Inquisition. Varric is a surfacer dwarf born into a family that had recently fled Orzammar due to a nasty run-in with the authorities, and as such he has no real loyalty to the Dwarven Kingdom. He spent his early days looking after his ailing mother, and later operated a spy network to deal with the dangers that arose once his family had established itself as one of Kirkwall's leading merchant houses. Despite his work, outsiders tended to see him as a bit of a layabout and ne'er-do-well who would spend his time hanging around in taverns and telling tall tales. But what tales they were! You see, Varric's major strengths, despite being handy with a crossbow and an expert at various other roguish activities are his charisma and ability to spin a yarn. Indeed, he acts as a narrator for much of Dragon Age 2's story, explained by him recounting the adventure to Cassandra during an interrogation. Entertaining, endearing, and even intimidating when need be, Varric's only flaw is that he can be wishy-washy when it comes to making decisions. But that's fine by us. I mean, he's not the one making the big moves that decide the fate of the world, he's the one recording them. And he's not above adding a nice bit of embellishment too, just to keep his fans happy. It's quite inspiring, really. In fact, it almost wants to make us write our own take on Varric's most famous work. But, Tough in Tyneside doesn't really have the same ring to it. Number 3. Solus, Dragon Age Inquisition. Solus is a helpful elven mage met early on in Dragon Age Inquisition with an innocuous fondness for creating charming murals and an innocently egg-shaped head which has no dark secrets or ulterior motives whatsoever. He helps the Inquisition through the kindness of his own heart, and there is absolutely nothing dreadful or wolf-like about him in any way. Alright, I can see I'm not really convincing you here, but that's what makes Solus such a cool and interesting character, the esoteric truth behind that calm and collected, egg-shaped exterior. On the surface of it, Solus is a wandering mage with clear elven ancestry, but no real bonds to either the Dalish or City Elf factions. His magic is self-taught, and he spent much of his time pre-game wandering the wilderness and dreaming in ancient ruins. He's fascinated by the Fade and the spirits that inhabit it, and seems to know things particularly useful to the Inquisition, such as the location of Skyhold Fortress, and that the protagonist is able to close rifts. He can come across as arrogant, but he's an exceptionally useful party member, with a striking look, some excellent voice acting, and something about him that's not quite right. Alright, so let's address the elephant in the room, or should that be the wolf god in the room? You see, in a post-credits scene with the ultra-powerful Flemeth, and in subsequent DLC and media, Solus is revealed to be, at least in Flemeth's eyes, Fen Harel, also known as the Dreadwolf, the elven god of rebellion. Whether this is exactly what Solus really is remains to be seen, but the reveal that the player has been dragging a potential god around the caverns and mud tracks of Thedas with them, fighting lowly bandits and looking for sparkly shards through glorified magical beach binoculars is rather fun. Yes, he has ulterior motives, but Solus is a fascinating character, and only has more secrets to be revealed as the saga continues. We can't wait to see what's next for this pointy-eared egghead, and for that, he makes it into our top 3. Number 2. Leliana, Dragon Age Origins. One of the Dragon Age Origins originals, and the only Dragon Age companion who takes on protagonist duties in her very own DLC, Leliana is a breakout character and one who is integral to the ongoing Dragon Age lore. Known for her striking red hair and her fun Orlesian accent, that's French to you and me, Leliana is a popular companion and potential romantic partner. By the time the events of Dragon Age Origins take place, Leliana has already led a life of subterfuge, having been taught in the arts of the Orlesian bard by eventual nemesis Marjolaine. Following Marjolaine's betrayal, Leliana found solace in the Chantry and became a devout follower, and joined the Warden in Lothering due to a vision from the Maker. While Dragon Age Origins is her only appearance as a playable companion so far, Leliana remains prominent throughout the series, becoming the left hand of the Divine prior to Dragon Age 2, and showing up in a cameo appearance there, and then having a much larger role in Dragon Age Inquisition, serving as the Inquisition's spymaster and sporting a cool hooded garment that makes her look all aloof and mysterious. Leliana is a multifaceted character whose past as an Orlesian bard both juxtaposes and intermingles with her present as a devout servant of the Chantry, as the skills she learned as part of Marjolaine's crew in Val Royeaux enable her to better serve the Divine, though there are signs that she both regrets and misses enhances her more unfettered past. It's this complexity, along with her staying power and quirky, funny moments, that make Leliana so popular. She also has a tendency to break out into song, though whether you enjoy her tuneful outbursts, especially the one where she holds the warden's gaze for an uncomfortably long time while belting out a tune of sorrow and joy, is a matter of personal preference. Honestly, we think it would have been more effective if she'd lip-synced a bit better, but hopefully in future she'll gain the confidence to do some real live performances. We believe in you, Leliana.
Number 1. Morrigan, Dragon Age Origins. Spooky Swamp Witch Morrigan is probably the most iconic Dragon Age character, and not just for her provocative clothing choices. She has a lot going for her right off the bat. A unique look, a piercing supernatural gaze, a fascinatingly sing-song way of talking, voice acted wonderfully by the great Claudia Black, and even an appearance on the original game's cover art. Morrigan is the type of character that you can't help but like, even if her morals and motives keep you constantly on edge as to what she might do next. She is one of the many daughters of legendary, possibly immortal Witch of the Wilds, Flemeth, and was raised in the Korcari Wilds, where she'd use her shape-shifting abilities to fit in with the local fauna.
After developing an interest in nearby humans, she would question locals caught out in the woods and use her wiles to talk her way into town in order to learn about social interactions, but eventually and understandably lost interest in the complicated world of civilization and returned to the wilderness. As such, by the time the Dragon Age Origins protagonist and crew came stomping into her territory, she was not very welcoming of outsiders. She finally joins the party after the Battle of Ostagar, under orders from Flemeth to aid in ending the Fifth Blight. Throughout the adventure, Morrigan will prove to be a powerful magical tool for the player to use in battle, and her upbringing will give her a unique view on the events of the game, with her advice and actions leaning strongly towards the pragmatic rather than the selfless. She even offers to mother a child with the Warden for the good of the mission in certain circumstances, but that's a bit too complicated to explain in this video, so you'll just have to go with it for now.
By the time Dragon Age Inquisition comes around, Morrigan's lifestyle has changed completely, as she is met in the decadently luxurious Winter Palace due to her new role as advisor to the Empress Selene. Once again, she is assigned to the player's party, and this new, posher Swamp Witch is even more powerful than her Origins counterpart, eventually gaining the ability to turn into a dragon if certain choices are made. That's super impressive. I can barely turn into a cul-de-sac.
Regardless, Morrigan is a many-layered, morally ambiguous, perfectly voice-casted, sultry and dangerous presence throughout the Dragon Age journey, and as such, reigns as our High Queen of companions in all of the Dragon Age franchise. We made her a nice throne and everything, but she disappeared off into the wilds again on some esoteric and shady business known only to the minds of mysterious witches raised by ancient beings of godlike power. Typical Morrigan, am I right?